When I started getting involved in real estate directly, I bought single family homes, mortgage notes, did some construction loan lending through self-directed IRAs. And then when I decided to build a syndication business and kind of make a transition out of working in corporate finance, again, that's the question, like what asset class is the right one to try to put together deals and bring in investors on? And kind of over a multi-year process of talking to a lot of different people and a lot of education, landed on mobile home parks and ended up putting together a couple syndications in that space.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I am your host, as always, Yona Weiss, here today with another incredible guest. Yeah, you guessed it. We have guests on this show, and they're always incredible. Excited to have here Todd Sulzinger on the show. Tell me a little bit about how you're doing today, Todd.
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to be on your show and looking forward to just talking about things and sharing ideas and things with your listeners. That's
why they're tuned in. You know, they get some great tips, great advice, and some fun stories sometimes on the show every week. So excited to have you. For our listeners who don't know who you are, Todd is the CEO of Blue Elm Investments. So it's a real estate investment company. Big surprise there, like all of our guests have something to do with real estate. He is in the San Francisco Bay Area and that had a background in Silicon Valley. So I'd love to kind of get into that background, how you got involved in the real estate game. You've also co-authored a great book. I've seen a lot of these books come out from, I don't know the name of the exact network there is, but the Super Success Habits of Super Achievers. So yeah, I'd love to just hear a little bit about your backstory, Todd, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Sure. Yeah, I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was born and raised in San Jose and grew up in the Bay Area. Spent most of my career working in corporate finance for a variety of Silicon Valley technology companies, and decided after doing that for a long time that I kind of got tired of that grind of, you know, in the corporate finance world, you're kind of always closing the books, going through audits, doing budgets. And after doing that for 20 plus years, it just got a little bit tiring and monotonous. And I also got tired of chasing the next big company, the next big thing. You know, in Silicon Valley, you always hear these stories about these secretaries that became millionaires overnight, what seemed like, from these companies that went public. And I've been through a couple IPOs, which has been great. I've also been in other situations where I was working for a can't miss, like, this is going to be the best company, great board of directors, amazing management team. And then like something happens and the company just disappears. And you don't hear about those stories. Or I've been working for great companies and they've said, hey, you know, we're going to relocate our headquarters from Northern California down to Southern California. I'm like, okay, well, San Diego is a nice place to live, but I don't want to get up and move my family down there and leave everything in Northern California. So part of it was just the grind of being in a finance career for a long time, and also that lack of control of working for somebody else. So I decided from there to make a transition into building a real estate business.
Did you have exposure to real estate in any way before, you know, you kind of made that switch? Where did you first learn about it or have exposure to real estate?
Well, I was always interested in it, but had no kind of like family or friend background that would have led me down that path. But I kind of in the maybe early 2010 timeframe, I started listening to podcasts in the early days of real estate podcast, primarily the real estate guys. They were probably one of the only ones out there that were producing a radio show or a podcast. And then another big turning point for me was I had a neighbor that I lived a couple doors down from, the first house that I bought. And he was just the most kind of like the millionaire next door type, really mild-mannered guy, you know, hair swooped over, like didn't wear great clothes, had a beat up car. And the more I got to know him over the time I lived next to him, he'd just kind of periodically say, oh, I have to go down and check on a rental I have around the corner. Okay. Oh, I need to, you know, a couple months later, I've got this strip mall down the street that I have to look at. Oh, you have to go drive over the hill and go look at this apartment building. And over a couple of year period, I realized this guy had built this decent sized real estate portfolio slowly over time, and he didn't have to work. He just had this income from his real estate portfolio. He was a big inspiration to me to think, okay, if I want to kind of start at this point and get to where he's going, now's the time to start. So that's when I really started to educate myself, listening to more podcasts, reading books, attending conferences, and then through that process ended up making my first plunge into buying some single family homes in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, quite a few hours from where I live. So that was kind of a big paradigm shift for me to think, oh God, I can actually successfully own real estate close to where I lived.
Well, it's probably very difficult, at least now, and probably even then, to buy real estate close to where you live. I mean, the value of homes, even commercial, is anything in the Bay Area is just out of control.
Yeah. And even back when I started, like I said, 2010, 11, 12, when I was first looking, that was a case where maybe an average single family home near where I lived might have been $500,000 or $600,000 at that time, whereas in the Dallas market, they were in the 120 to 150 range. So that just kind of blew my mind that you could acquire real estate for that little money, but have rents that were still pretty darn good. So that's kind of what led me down that path to look outside of California. As skeptical as I was, thinking, how is that possible? You can't drive by the properties you own and check up on them all the time and see that they're okay.
Right.
But after meeting property managers, brokers, other investors who were doing the same thing, I got over that mental hurdle to dive in and do it.
Sure. It's definitely one of those misconceptions out there. And sure, there are more hands-on investors that prefer to be very, very hands-on, local, but plenty of people are investing out of state. It has its own challenges. Obviously, you have to rely on property management, and that can come with its own challenges. And sure, people have been burnt in that way. But if you do it properly, set up the systems, it can be done. Now, I know you also moved into the commercial real estate space. You mentioned to me you're buying commercial mortgage notes or residential mortgage notes, as well as you've done a lot of mobile home parks as well. So if you had a favorite that you would just, if you could go all in on, or you do like the diversity of investing in different asset classes?
I do like the diversity. When I started to make that transition from having pretty much like all of my investments into stock market, either direct investing with brokerages or through 401ks, and started to make that shift into real estate, I really like having that asset class much better. It was, you don't have that sort of daily watching the stock market, what's happening, which stock do I invest in, what kind of fees are they taking? And so to kind of that initial feeling of enjoying real estate a lot better than let me just say like, okay, like what would I like to invest in? And that's potentially one of the dangers of real estate is there are so many opportunities and possibilities and ways to invest that finding a focus is difficult. So when I started getting involved in real estate directly, I bought single family homes, mortgage notes, did some construction loan lending through self-directed IRAs. And then when I decided to build a syndication business and kind of make a transition out of working in corporate finance, again, that's the question, like what asset class is the right one to try to put together deals and bring in investors on? And kind of over a multi-year process of talking to a lot of different people and a lot of education, landed on mobile home parks and ended up putting together a couple syndications in that space.
Yeah, I mean, mobile home parks are really interesting. It's gotten a lot of attention over the past couple of years because a lot more private equity is going into that space, more institutional money. And even the people that were just chasing multifamily because of the compressed cap rates are trying out this new asset class. I mean, would you say it can be done, kind of similar as other asset classes, or is it its own beast that needs to be learned and treated separately?
I think there are some similarities in that it's mobile home park is another multifamily asset, but I would say it's a different beast. They've got their own things that make them different from, buying an apartment building in terms of, due diligence, in a mobile home park. Oftentimes they were built, in the county property outside the main part of the city. So they might have their own private utilities, whether that's septic tanks or wells, sometimes waste treatment systems. It would be, uncommon to find that in an apartment building, and probably easier from a property inspection standpoint to hire a multifamily property inspector to go out and kind of say, hey, we're going to look at this building's roofs and balconies and, appliances are like and plumbing in that. Whereas in a mobile home park, there's a lot more unknowns just because of the way they were constructed, possibly how long ago they were built. So there's kind of usually more work to them. So I do some work on the mobile home park consulting side, and we do have clients that come to us and say, I know apartment buildings really well. I've been in that business for a long time. I wanted to get into mobile home parks, and I really feel like I don't know what I'm doing. So it's even interesting to hear from experienced apartment investors that as they get into it, find that mobile home parks are a little bit different animal.
That's interesting because you would think every asset class has it, and every business really has its own nuances. But what I've heard, we've had many guests on the show talk about mobile home parks and the challenges that come along with that, especially given a certain type of demographic that typically will tenant the base. But, you wouldn't think that it's just totally foreign, right? You may be able to, really anyone can do it if you learn the proper ways to do it. And like I said, you're someone who's been in the space, who hasn't, and as you mentioned, you're consulting others doing it. So obviously you have enough of wherewithal, enough background and experience that you can show others and kind of help them, guide them through that process.
Yeah, and I know there are some smaller local investors that I know who I've got a few friends that have mobile home parks local to where they live. And those almost feel like are managed a bit more like a small multifamily or a single family home where they can manage the on-site manager, or if it's maybe a smaller park, manage it themselves, be able to find the local crews to do rehabs or maintain the park, that they can keep a better eye on things because I would say, tend to need more attention than maybe an apartment building would, where you can hire a professional property manager who knows that business well.
Right. Yeah, oftentimes you'll need like an on-site manager, even a smaller park. Whereas, multifamily, you won't need an on-site manager until you get up to, maybe 100 plus units.
Right, exactly.
Well, I'm really curious about the mortgage note aspect of something you've been involved in. I have not had too much exposure to that space. Tell me a little bit about what is the actual process? Like, what are you doing? You're buying notes. Who are you buying them from? What's the risk involved? Just give me a little crash course, if you would, on mortgage note investing.
Sure. So in terms of kind of my investing, I've done kind of just a couple private notes myself, and then done most of my investing in other mortgage funds. The reason why I liked about them, and I'll say their names, the two that I've invested with, just so your investors can check them out, is one's called AHP, American Homeowner Preservation, I think was their name originally, and another one called Aspen Funds. And the first thing that turned me on to them, at least when I first started working with AHP, was kind of this social aspect to mortgage note investing, that you've got people that fell behind on their mortgage. Oftentimes it's due to job loss, medical expenses, divorce, things like that, fell behind for whatever reason. And their banks often, just due to a lot of requirements in terms of what their ratios of good loans versus bad loans that they carry on their books, don't want to hold defaulted loans or people with loans 90 days or plus past due on their books. So they'll sell them off, sometimes individually, sometimes in big bulks to hedge funds or other investors. And in the best situations, those loans can be purchased at a discount. So maybe the person owes $100,000 on a $150,000 house. They've fallen behind. Bank wants to get it off their books. Maybe they sell that loan to an investor for $70,000 or $80,000. And prices have gone up in that space as well. So maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that would have been $50,000. So somebody buys that note, then can go to the homeowner and say, hey, homeowner, we don't want to foreclose on you. We'd like to get you back on track. You owe $100,000 on your mortgage. How about we renegotiate for, $85,000? So the homeowner thinks, wow, I'm getting $15,000 shaved off my loan. They're not going to foreclose on me. They're going to renegotiate my terms. I'll kind of get back on track, and the homeowner can stay where they're living. From an investor standpoint, they bought this loan at a discount. They're getting current income, usually at a higher interest rate, because these people wouldn't typically be able to go to a bank and get their loan refinanced. If they did refinance, it would be refinanced out at the higher balance.
Right.
So it's just kind of a win-win. It allows somebody to stay in their home, get back on track, but then it also can give good returns to investors. So when I kind of discovered that world, the returns were great. The idea of being able to keep people in their homes was interesting. And interesting too, that the banks don't have that capability internally. They don't really want to reach out and have teams of employees working with individual people to a very great extent.
Right.
But there's other companies that are out there solving that problem. And they can put together a great business and give good returns to investors.
Gotcha. So what you're doing, I mean, essentially you're buying a mortgage at a discount directly from the bank where they're giving up. I mean, I actually had a friend who would buy all types of loans from banks, not just mortgages, but kind of unsecured loans and debt, even credit card debt. I think he had a whole company where he was buying, hundreds of thousands of much more discounted, because essentially the banks just give up on it at a certain point and they'll send it to collection agencies and things like that. But there's a lot of potential if you have the right systems in place and you can do it. I like what you've described much better, because it seems like you can actually go to the homeowner who wants to stay in their home and offer them an alternative. And it's kind of, you offer them a win-win. The bank doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And you come in as kind of like, hopefully a good guy, as opposed to like a loan shark or a collection agency. You're just trying to offer them a better solution.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes also the mortgage balances can be sometimes too small to even have a bank be interested. I purchased a loan for a small house in Indiana a few months ago, and the original balance on the loan was $50,000 and the current balance is around $35,000. So they're not going to be able to go to a local bank or a big bank and say, hey, could I do a new loan or refinance at $50,000 or $60,000? There's just not enough skin in the game and fees for banks to do that. So they have to turn to private lenders to be able to get a loan. So I know some people think, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I was getting a mortgage at 3.5% or 4% interest. That's terrible that somebody's paying 9 or 10. I think, well, that is higher, but they don't have a choice otherwise. Yeah. So they would either not be able to buy a house or they would have to pay cash for it. And from a monthly payment standpoint, like for example, in this house in Indiana, their monthly payment is, I think, $500. If they were to go out and rent locally, they'd probably be paying $1,000 or $1,200. Right. So it's maybe from a percentage rate standpoint, higher than what somebody with a great credit score with a big down payment could get. They're still able to live in a house that they're building equity in for a lot less than they would pay for rent.
100%. That's always a challenge, especially if you have older people where it's going to be very difficult for them to move, and they still have this debt, hanging over their balance, which is probably messing up their credit score and all kinds of things, which won't even allow them to get a new loan. It seems like a great solution to be able to buy that. Where do you find, when you did source these, you mentioned the funds that you participated in, but for someone out there who's kind of piquing their curiosity and doing something like this, is it something you go directly to the bank, or do they have auctions when this is taking place where you can actually acquire these notes, or is it through brokers? How do you actually get in contact with something like this?
There are some platforms out there. One that I purchased this note through is one called PaperStack.
Okay.
And it's a platform that's been built for people that are buying and selling mortgages. And it can range anywhere. Sometimes it could be, balances that are as low as $10,000 or $15,000 up to, $500,000 or $600,000, depending on the value of the house. So there is an active market for those. There's a few other platforms out there. There's some Facebook groups out there that I belong to that I'll see people actively out on there saying, hey, they're, having notes that they're interested in buying or selling. And it'll typically be at some discount. Right. Like they'll say, hey, the balance on the loan is $50,000. I'll sell this for $45,000. And, a lot of different reasons for that. Sometimes people, buy this asset, maybe got some decent cash flow on it for a while and needs that cash for something else. And they're willing to sell it for, some percentage discount so they can do something else with that money while they were able to earn some income on it for the time that they held it.
Very fascinating. Obviously, it comes with its own risk, like every investment. Like, how do you actually do the due diligence on something like this to know whether it's worth it?
Yeah, and that's something I'm still learning. That's the part that is tricky about this business to understand. Like, there's judicial and non-judicial states in terms of if the loan does go to foreclosure, the house does go to foreclosure, how you'd be able to go through that process. Be able to do research on if there's any other tax liens, because often if people are behind on their mortgage, sometimes they're often behind on property taxes. Being able to do the research to see if there's any other liens on the property or potentially a second mortgage behind the first mortgage. Getting a good sense of the value of the house. If you've got a big spread between what a value is, if you're kind of buying a mortgage in a market the houses are $200,000 and you're buying a $50,000 mortgage, you've got a pretty good spread. If it's a higher balance, then you might have to do a lot more research on that house to find out like really
Sure.
what condition is it in? Does it need a lot of repairs? Because if you did have to go to foreclosure, which again isn't typically the goal, but if you did have to, you wouldn't want to have to take over a house that you were potentially underwater on the loan balance.
Right. Now, if it's free and clear, not free and clear, but if there are no other positions, there's no second mortgage or anything like that, essentially, like if the person doesn't, they've defaulted or what have you, you essentially can, obviously there are rules and there's different states have different rules and things like that, but you could foreclose on that. Essentially, you own as the bank, as the mortgage note holder, you would own the house.
Yeah, you're essentially the bank in this situation. So the goal typically is you want to be able to keep somebody in their house if it's actually occupied. But if you had to go through the foreclosure process, then you'd end up taking it over. And there are certain states some people don't like to buy notes in. I think New York is an example. A few other states where it could be the foreclosure process can take a long time, and it just adds to the risk if you've got a lot more carrying costs to actually foreclose.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are, certain states where it's not feasible. It really, the judicial system, whatever, just makes it very difficult and time consuming to even get through that process.
Right.
So tell me quickly, if you would, about this book that you've co-authored. Like I mentioned, I've seen, Brian Tracy and these groups, many books come out with different titles and people basically telling their stories in a group of people. Like, how did you get involved with that circle and, get your story as part of that, success habits for superachievers?
Yeah. Thanks for asking about this. A gentleman by the name of Kyle Wilson, who was Jim Rohn's
Kyle Wilson, that's right.
18-year business partner, really took Jim from doing kind of really small dates at a lot lower fees kind of earlier in his career. And Kyle came in and said, like, you've got a great message. If you're willing to do it, I can, start taking you across the country and really help spread your message. And then Kyle ended up then managing Dennis Waitley and Brian Tracy and kind of helping quite a few speakers be a great promoter for them. So I met Kyle through Robert Helms of the real estate guys because they were been friends for a long time. And Kyle has an inner circle mastermind that I joined a few years ago. It's a great group of people. Kyle's fantastic. The tribe of people that he brings together in the mastermind is really fantastic. And Kyle, a few years back, had an idea of putting together some collaborative books where kind of each book would have its own theme and then would bring in different authors sharing their story related to that theme. So this book I was in, Success Habits of Superachievers, he was able to bring in Brian Tracy, Darren Hardy, Phil Collins from Def Leppard, Todd Sulzinger, the ex-Toronto Blue Jays pitcher, a lot of different people, good chunk in the real estate space as well. Robert Helms has a chapter in the book, and we're just able to share our stories. And he's done this for several books, again, each one with its own theme. And, as I've read the books in the past that he's put together, I just found them really inspirational and relatable because you've got people that you might, maybe put on a pedestal in terms of like what they've experienced and how successful they are. And then when you kind of read some of their backstory, you get to understand there was a lot more to it, a lot more struggles they had to overcome. And it's good to be able to read those stories, to have other people, kind of relate to where they are in their life and to give them some maybe motivation and tips and tricks to accelerate their success.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've read a couple of them. I don't remember who it was years ago that sent me a copy. Maybe Lane Kawaoka was part of that many years ago. Yeah, I definitely got a couple of those.
Okay, yeah, Lane might have been.
But I do remember, Todd Sulzinger, I remember his story and, some others through reading that book. You're absolutely right. It's so amazing when you see these people who are successful and super achievers, right? But everyone has challenges, everyone has struggles, and it's about kind of the mindset and learning how to overcome that to be successful. So I've taken a lot from, I remember reading that book and took some, actionable steps years ago. But yeah, definitely recommend that and put that in the show notes for anyone who wants to check out that and the series as well. So appreciate you sharing that story. Let's transition now to what we call the final four, Todd. These are 4 questions I ask all my guests. Yes. The first one for you is, what is the worst job that you ever had?
Probably the very first job I had was like umpiring baseball games. So that wasn't my worst job. But then when I kind of got my first real job, it was a dishwasher for a Sizzler steakhouse. So that was just, terrible, backbreaking, wet, steamy work at minimum wage. So I would say that was the worst job I had. didn't last too long, probably only for about 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, sounds like one of those kind of transitionary jobs you learn very quickly.
Yeah.
Dishwashing is very, very laborious. Yeah. Second question, what's a book you've read that has given you a paradigm shift?
There's a couple I've read over the past year. One was called The Gap and the Gain. And it's kind of based on this concept. If you are living in the gap, you're always kind of looking forward about all the things that you don't have. So you're saying, oh, I've got this here, but I want to have that in the future. So you kind of feel that there's this big gap versus kind of looking more historically, everything you've achieved from a certain starting point and looking at that from a gain standpoint. So I just talked about a lot of different areas in life where you can either kind of live in the gap, feeling like, missing out on things, not as successful versus kind of always reflecting about success and achievement. So that's been, I think, kind of a paradigm shift for me to kind of catch myself thinking, am I living in the gap now right now, or am I living with more of a gain mentality?
That's awesome. And I love how a lot of these books, and there's so many incredible books out there, and each one has a different way of just explaining some of these concepts to us.
No doubt.
You can choose what works for you, but essentially it's all about just putting it into practice and figuring out how I can maximize, life and being, living the best life possible. So I love that there are books like this, The Gap and the Gain, that just gives you that perspective of how to refocus and reframe your life, make sure that you're doing the right thing. Yes. Very cool. Third question, what's a skill or talent that you would like to learn? And this could be anything.
I have always wanted to learn how to play an instrument. I took piano lessons for a little while, maybe 15 years ago, and I fiddled around with guitar, and I have not gotten to the point of actually really seriously taking lessons and learning how to do those. But I think that would be an amazing talent to have.
Okay, so playing the guitar. I think you're the third guest in a row that has said playing the guitar. So that's going to be a popular one.
So we can start a band with a bunch of amateurs.
There you go. That's going to be fun. We'll put it on Zoom. We'll do a whole thing. Okay. So fourth and final question, what does success mean to you?
I think for me, success usually relates to helping people. I think that's probably when I'm, feel the best about what I'm doing, whether it was when I was in my corporate career or now as I'm putting together syndications and helping investors. That feeling of helping people, doing something to make their life better, make their life easier, that's what feels like success to me.
That's awesome. I love that. I relate very much to that definition also. People have different definitions, but if you can help other people and try to do that, that's very, very fulfilling, successful indeed. So Todd, how can our listeners reach you or find you? Where could they reach out to you?
Yeah, well, my company is called Blue Elm Investments. So it's blue like the color, elm like the elm tree, investments. So blueelminvestments.com. I have an investor club you can sign up for. I send regular updates on what's happening in the industry and real estate industry, sometimes specific to mobile home parks. I put together real estate syndications, sometimes for both accredited and non-accredited investors. So people can reach out to discuss those potential opportunities. And so they can either sign up for the investor club or send an email to Todd, Todd, at blueelminvestments.com.
Okay, awesome. Sounds like a plan. We'll put it in the show notes. Make sure everyone can find that there, along with a great summary that Streamline Podcasts does when they put those show notes together. So make sure to click the show notes and get all the resources you need from that. Thank you so much, Todd, for taking the time out today. It's really awesome. Great to get to know you a little better and learn a lot. I mean, I really did, especially digging deeper about the mortgage notes. So I appreciate you giving us your time today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Yona. It's great to kind of meet you, face to face, even if it was via Zoom. So that was awesome.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you guys for tuning in once again. And remember, the best advice comes only when you ask. Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn. Send me a DM, a connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.